Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Today we're starting a four-part series on prayer in worship. And this is a series within the series on how and why we worship. And we'll talk in depth today about music as prayer in worship. So we'll start with a simple definition for prayer. Prayer is communication with God, however you understand God. It can be both talking to God and listening for God, or simply communing with or being in the presence of God. So with that definition, there is no leap at all to see that music, and singing in particular, are forms of prayer, forms of talking to and listening to and communion with God. St. Augustine said famously, "The one who sings prays twice," referring to the words that we're singing being a form of prayer, and then the music, the notes, the harmonies, a different sort of communication with God. When we sing or hum or play an instrument, we're using our whole bodies to create these vibrations that go out into creation. So we are creating and adding to creation with our bodies when we make music. Further, we can then combine those vibrations with the vibrations that other people are making around us so that we get this sort of amazing communal, communicative communion experience. So after the service today, I'll be sharing with you what I've written, which is a draft vision for music at First Presbyterian. And anyone who wants to can stay after the service for feedback and discussion time about the statement. It's not set in stone, it's a draft, and it will address 5 areas of music in worship. But before we get there, a couple things that we have to acknowledge. First, we have to acknowledge that this congregation has experienced a lot of transition in the past 5 years. It's been a year since I've been here, and so we might start to feel like we're getting past that, but it's still a reality. There's been interim pastors. There was a permanent pastor who then got sick and had to resign, and then there were more interim pastors. And with every new pastor, there was a new and different set of ideas about music and about worship. In addition, the congregation has always had their own opinions and preferences, and that changes as new people come and go. Sometimes they make those opinions known, sometimes they don't. And through it all, Andy, our wonderful music director, has been there trying to accommodate all the different pastors while keeping the congregation happy and the choir happy and himself happy. And there must have been times when he was pulling out his hair in that process. I've worked with a lot of music directors over the years, and I know from just 1 year with Andy that he is one of the good ones. He is, yes. He is a gifted musician, he is creative, and he's flexible and accommodating. So nothing I want to say today has anything to do with the critique of Andy. And I believe that whatever we decide as a congregation that we want music to be in worship, he'll be able to lead us in that effort. And none of this is a critique on the congregation or the choir as well, which has held together and stayed strong through these long periods of transition. We also should acknowledge up front that feelings about music can be very strong. These feelings are much stronger than what topping you like on your pizza. Music from the time that we are very young shapes us and forms us. It shapes our brain. Powerful memories and emotions are connected to music. Music is often sacred to us, even if it has nothing to do with church. So people can have transcendent experiences listening to music and making music, whether they're involved with classical or opera or rock or heavy metal or folk or jazz or gospel or spirituals or hip hop or Christmas carols or songs around the campfire or dance music, etc., etc. All of that music can produce spiritual experiences. So then how do we talk about worship music as a community in a way that acknowledges preferences and tastes while hopefully rising above them? What I hope to do with the statement that I've drafted, and I've shared this with Andy and I've shared it with the session, is to ground that discussion in our values as a church. In particular, the values expressed in our vision statement as a church, which is to grow toward becoming an intergenerational, multi-ethnic, anti-racist, geographically diverse, and economically diverse Christian community gathered together and sustained by creative worship, biblically oriented preaching, empathetic ministry, while non-violently disrupting injustice in the world. So the goal is to talk about music from the perspective of our community values in a way that transcends personal preferences, acknowledges how music shapes our deepest psychological and emotional selves while trying to live into our church's prophetic and ambition vision statement. No problem. The 5 areas I want to talk about are congregational singing, musical diversity, instrumentation, mood, and thematic emphasis. So let's start with congregational singing. Martin Luther, the great reformer of the church, said of singing, "As long as I live, there will never be enough singing." And John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, once said to a congregation, "Sing lustily and with good courage. Beware of singing as if you were half dead or half asleep, but let your voice rise up with strength." I think, can anybody relate to singing as if you're half dead or half asleep in church? Well, my dream for this church is that we gain a reputation in our community as the church that sings. That people know if they come to worship at First Presbyterian, they're going to be wrapped up in congregational singing. That if we have the doors open and people are walking by, they're going to be just drawn in by the volume and enthusiasm of our congregational singing. Now, we aren't there yet. If this is a competition and about which congregation sings the most, we're not last. I don't think we're last, but we aren't first either. And I want us to be in first. Therefore, one of the values expressed in the draft music statement is musical accessibility. Everyone who walks in this door has a voice, unless they literally do not have a voice, but everyone has a voice. And Psalm 150 says, "Let everything that has breath praise the Lord." And I know people are always saying that they can't sing. But if you are with 60 to 100 people singing lustily to a familiar tune, then everyone can sing. Not everyone can play an instrument, but everyone has a voice. And congregational singing is one of the easiest ways that we can help people commune with God and with each other. So we need to make it a priority, and we need to make music and singing accessible. Accessibility means singability, that we're not singing songs that are just really hard that most people can't sing. It also calls for repeating songs enough that we get to know them. So even if there is a little bit of a challenge, we learn it and get to know it. Like when you're singing carols at Christmas, there's a different quality to that singing because it's tunes and words with which you're familiar for so many years. I think we want everyone to sing every song in worship like they're singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And also, caroling often involves a cappella singing. I think a cappella singing is a great way from time to time to emphasize our voices as an instrument and to show that we are really relying on and supporting each other when we sing. Further, to the end of lusty congregational singing, the statement calls for a teaching spirit in worship when it comes to music. It calls for the music leadership to treat the congregation as a choir, encouraging, coaching, and teaching as we go. It calls for sharing the meaning of the music so people are motivated and inspired to participate. We can't just wish for a reputation to be the congregation that sings. We have to figure out how to take concrete steps toward that goal. That's the first area, congregational singing. The second is musical diversity. Musical diversity involves both choosing music from diverse eras and diverse genres and cultures. When it comes to diverse eras, it means singing stuff as old as we possibly can imagine, all the way to brand new stuff today. But on that continuum, we have to be intentional about including new music regularly. If we're not introducing new music, making it part of our repertoire, we're going to get stuck in the past. And new generations will get the message when they walk in the door, oh, this is a church that sings older music. And it's amazing how fast that can happen. It doesn't take long for a generation to find some music old. Remember, our church vision statement is to be a multi-generational church. Now, of course, there's a balance because I also said we have to sing music that's familiar. So as we introduce new music, we need to be thinking about ways to do so intentionally so that we're familiarizing ourselves with the music as we go. And then musical diversity involves cultural diversity, singing culturally diverse music. And friends, this is where the anti-racism part of our vision statement comes in. If we're going to be a multi-ethnic, anti-racist church, as our vision statement calls us to be, we need to make musical choices that are multi-ethnic and anti-racist. So let's step back for a minute and review the concept of anti-racism. Anti-racism is premised on the fact that America is a white supremacist culture. Those in power are predominantly white. The images we see on TV are predominantly white. Standards of beauty are based on white bodies, white faces, and white hair. In our justice system, white people are often assumed innocent, where people of color are looked at with suspicion. In America, white people have, in general, on average, greater wealth, better employment opportunities, better medical care, and live longer. White supremacist racism is part of the water we drink in America, and it's part of the air we breathe. You can't grow up in America and not internalize some of that. And even though everyone can internalize white supremacist racism, and everyone does to some extent, the racism of white people against people of color, whether interpersonal or structural, has the power to do greater harm than the racism of people of color against white people or against each other. White racism against people of color has been doing incredible harm to hundreds and millions of people for hundreds of years, and it continues to right up to this very moment when we are fighting white nationalism in our government. Racism of people of color against each other or against white people is like shooting a bow and arrow. Racism of white people against people of color is like shooting a machine gun. Anti-racism says that in this context, it's not enough, especially for white people, to say, but I'm not racist. In this context, we need to acknowledge that, yes, we are all racist. We can't avoid it. And when the racism manifests in white people, it's especially harmful. But what we can do is work against that racism within ourselves, within our church, within our institutions, within our society. That's being anti-racist, acknowledging what's inside of us and saying we are going to intentionally work to overcome it and change it. So First Pres Palo Alto is a predominantly white church in this racist, white supremacist society. And we're saying we want to be anti-racist. That can mean a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different work we can do. Musically, in worship, it means we have to change the way we privilege music from European and white American traditions. We have to change the way we privilege music from European and white American traditions. Now, let me be clear what I did not just say. I did not just say we have to abandon music from European and white American traditions. If that's what you heard, I invite you to do some self-reflection. Because I said we cannot privilege a certain kind of music over others. And if you heard we must abandon that kind of music entirely, you may be equating removal of privilege with oppression. And they're not the same. Can we still play Bach? Of course, we can still play Bach. But we also have to be intentional about branching out regularly. We have to play and sing music from composers of color. We have to sing music from different American traditions with a healthy dose of spirituals and Black gospel. We have to play music from other countries and other cultures, all while being sensitive that we are not just appropriating other cultures. Right? The choir can sing "Come All Ye People" from our hymnal, which is an African tune, but maybe they shouldn't wear kente cloth while they sing it. There's a balance that we have to strike here. We have to do this carefully, thoughtfully, and intentionally, and courageously. Third area of music is instrumentation. We have a pipe organ. It's right there. You might not be able to see it, but it's this big, huge instrument that's built into this church. And I'll be very honest with you, personally, as a preference, I don't need a pipe organ to worship God. But I know that some of you, the pipe organ is extremely helpful in your worship of God. It's like a shortcut to worship of God. So when I'm in worship, sometimes I really dig the pipe organ, but at other times I think, well, I'm glad this is feeding somebody. I'm glad there's somebody who is really getting connected to God because of this. And I think that's a good attitude for us to take about any music that we might not like, to say, well, this is feeding somebody. But I do think if we have this pipe organ and we have this guy that knows how to play it really well, we should have at least one pipe organ piece in church every Sunday. Ideally, from composers of color, from women composers, from young composers, but occasionally some old dead white guy composers too. However, so we have the pipe organ, let's use it. I do suggest in the statement that most of our singing be accompanied by piano and or guitar, probably acoustic guitar. Both of those instruments give an informal tone to what we are doing and an accessibility to what we are doing. I think we want to cultivate that informality. We want a feeling that's not stuffy. We can't have a stuffy church and expect to be multiracial and multi-generational anti-racist. We have to be accessible, be relatable, be easy, be joyful, and I think guitar and piano both communicate those qualities in our music. And when we do play the organ, we should still think in terms of that accessibility, that teaching spirit. If during a given organ piece, only a handful of people in the congregation know why it's special or hard or beautiful, we have work to do. If you love the organ, don't you want other people to learn to love it too? And that might require some teaching. Next topic, mood. Sunday worship music should be joyful and up-tempo. Sunday morning is always a celebration of the resurrection. Even during Lent, Sunday morning is a celebration of the resurrection. The music should be uplifting. It should be a party in here. Yes, there are times for quiet and meditative music, of course, but most of the time we should be celebrating. Think about a wedding reception. There's a slow dance at the beginning, maybe two, but in short order, people are kicking off their shoes and dancing to really loud, up-tempo music. Now, after a long period of that, the DJ comes on and is like, all right, we're going to slow things down a minute here. But that's an intentional step that they take. Now we're going to have a piece of slow music, and then we're going to get back to the dancing and the fun. Worship music should try to strike about the same balance. This should be a celebration. Finally, I'm going to do a finally plus one, just to warn you. Finally, when we sing in this church, we need to be singing about our values. Progressive theology, justice, liberation, equality, freedom, peace. You know, music was such an important part of the civil rights movement. And music is still sung today at protests, and that includes old and new songs. Sunday worship should be a rally for justice and liberation, and the music should rev us up for action in the world. Now, the one plus one I want to add here, a value that I haven't talked about and is mentioned briefly in the statement, and that's musical quality. There are two ways to think about quality when it comes to music, and we have to be really careful about both in the church. If we say, for instance, that hip hop is not quality music, but classical is, what are we saying about the communities from which hip hop was born? Or maybe we criticize pop music. We say pop's not real music. What are we saying to all the people who like popular music? And it's called popular music for a reason. What we're doing is we're looking down our noses at them. We're saying we're superior in our musical tastes. Now, I'm not saying you have to like pop music or hip hop, but we need to be careful when we criticize a genre. A better attitude is one of humility and curiosity. What does this genre tell me about the people who listen to it and from the cultures in which it came? What am I missing that could help me grow as a person as I listen to this music? You might have to read an article. You know, there are a lot of articles after the Super Bowl show. Kendrick Lamar, a lot of people are like, hey, white people, here's what just happened, you know? That's okay, read an article, that's great. But there's this other side to quality when it comes to music, and that's when someone is really good at music and someone is less good. We know the difference between an amateur piano player and a professional piano player. And a really skilled musician can lift us up in ways that an amateur just will not. And of course, we all love that kind of quality music that can really lift us up and transport us. And that usually comes from somebody who's dedicated their life to practicing that kind of music and refining it. But there's a practical matter when it comes to this conversation in church. You usually have to pay for a professional. So the question for church becomes one of our values. How much should the church invest in paying professionals to uplift us through music, to perform for us? And this is not a cut and dried question. This is not like an easy answer. But we know there's an upper limit, right? There must be an upper limit. If we could have all the money in the world and we could buy a 12-voice professional choir and fill up that whole chancel with instrumentalists, is that what the church should be doing with its resources? Of course not. So where's the line? What's too much? We give a lot of money to the poor and needy, to organizations that are doing amazing work in the world. Should we take some of that money and use it to pay professional musicians? I think when it comes down to what we pay for, it's a question of what do we need to pay for that's going to support our values and move us toward our vision. And again, that's not just a simple question. So, in summary, the values that I'm lifting up and suggesting to you are congregational singing as a huge priority, accessibility of music and a teaching spirit in worship, musical diversity, including new music and being intentionally anti-racist in a context of our white supremacist society, instrumentation that supports congregational singing and communicates informality and welcome to all different kinds of people, a preference for up-tempo celebratory music, and music that advances our progressive theology, justice, liberation, and peacemaking. What about those values resonates with you? What's challenging? What's missing from the statement? I invite you to stay after the service for discussion and to share your feedback with me or the session. Amen.